you know what makes you interesting? You know, sometimes we're uncomfortable to tell our story. It's like, look, it's not that big of a deal. It's my life. We're just telling our life story. Here's what makes you very unique as an artist, and I don't know if the world appreciates you as much as they do. And I'll unpack my opinion on how I view you, okay? For somebody to have the amount of life, you know, acting is what? To draw from a certain place you were at in your life to get into that emotion or reacting. You know, there's different kind of acting, but a person who's more well-rounded, they can go and explain a scene better because they can go there, right? So background, dad, Republican, economist, conservative, then he loses, debt, divorce, so you can draw from what it is to be a father, Republican, conservative, then you experience a kid, divorced, 16 years old, heartbroken, what it is to have that take place, mom, French, so you learn the history of French because mom's going to pass that down to you, then you go military, so you have a little bit of that experience from the military. You go to see exactly what's going on in Vietnam. I mean, you draw from that for a movie, which leads later on to Platoon, which I don't know how many times I watched Platoon when I was in the Army. Then you're talking about Yale, to be around people like Bush who come from families of strong lineage, and they get to go there, so you see what parties they can participate in and you can't, and how that privileged life is like. Then being a teacher, your compassion for the African-American black community, and then coming up, I mean, the amount of things you can draw from, and you tell the story, we feel it. Meaning we, being the audience, we see your final product. We don't, we see what you're putting together. So it's impressive. And one of the things that I appreciate about your work is the fact that, look, today we had a doctor here on, and we're having a conversation with him, and I remember years ago when I got enamored by JFK and what happened with them. All of a sudden, I'm like, I got to interview. I watched your documentary, JFK, and obviously I've seen the movie. I've seen a lot of that stuff. But last time I'm watching a documentary, and Abraham Bolden, I remember when we interviewed him 5 years ago, or Clint Hill, or RFK, or, you know, Cyril Wecht. Cyril and I had a phenomenal interview together because I want to know that story. But you also, this is what it comes across to me. I think young filmmakers who are not afraid, who have audacity, and they have the guts to do what an artist ought to do, and we ought to let this person do what they're doing. Is, it seems like you're the kind of guy that if you are looking at Castro and everybody's saying stuff about Castro, you're like, look, I don't know what you think. You hate him, you love him, you can't stand him, you could care less about him. I wanted to learn. Yeah. That's what I wanted. I don't want to judge, I want to learn. Okay, this Putin guy's a horrible person, great. Okay, let's say you're right. People from Russia, some of them love him, some of them hate him. I don't know. You know what? Hey, can we do an interview? I want to learn, right? Hey, this Ukraine thing, everything I hear about with Ukraine, you know, love them, hate them, you know, the battle of victors and all this other stuff. I don't know. I want to learn. I think the courage you have to go touch some of the subjects that the rest of the world is like, well, Fox News said this, they must be right. CNN said this, they must be right. MSNBC said this, they must be right. New York Post said it, they must be right. New York Times said they must be right. You're like, yeah, I don't know if I believe any one of them. I kind of want to find out for myself. That takes a lot of courage to do what you've done. That's what's impressive.
I think our stories are similar because what you told me is you came from from Syria,
Iran, born and raised in. But my dad was
Iran,
a Syrian.
yeah.
My mother was Armenian.
So you're the ultimate too. You're a refugee from those situations, and you're in this country, which is a big open freeway in many ways, and a marketplace of ideas, but you're open and you want to see, you want to learn. That was what happened to me, and I'm still on that journey, and I'm 75 years old.
Incredible.
I'd love to know more. I'd like to, so many people I'd like to meet, but it's, you know, the rigidity and the orthodoxy is what always close you down. They always limit you, constantly, all my life. You know, my father at first, you know, he certainly didn't approve of my thoughts about the war and this, and certainly I started to question economics. You know, he was a big Franklin Roosevelt. He was not. He was there in the 1930s. He was there in the Depression. He despised Roosevelt, and I had that most of my childhood. But as I got into American history more and more and really studied it, I went back, not in school, years later with my project, Untold History of the United States. It's a 12-part history. I'm very proud of it. It took 5 years to put that together with Peter Kuznick, a historian who taught me. had me read the right books and think about American history in a completely different way than I thought of it before. And that's the result of that. And Roosevelt is very much a pillar in that movie. And so is John Kennedy. It becomes more and more apparent the more you read about Mr. Kennedy that he was truly in that same tradition of Roosevelt, being open-minded to other people, very much as an Irishman, anti-colonial, very much so. Had a much more deeper relationship with Africa, with Indonesia, with South America, and with Nasser in Egypt than we know.
Oh, Nasser was heartbroken when
You know, he was working very effectively to reestablish American relations with these countries. In Sukarno in Indonesia, and he was changing the policy in Vietnam. Unfortunately, he didn't live long enough to get it done, because Lyndon Johnson, who was supposed to be his transition, went in a complete U-turn in a different direction.
Immediately.
Which American historians do not admit. So here again, this is an interesting, we come across orthodoxy in history too, and in our thinking, and in our media. And that's always been my problem, coming up against that and being criticized for that, for challenging those views.
Is that because the natural, like, you know how we grow up, like the one person you never question is your father, that if you eventually were like, I don't know if my dad's right and I'm going to go figure it out for myself, like that is still with you at 75, where today father may be the president or the government or the media or whatever, you're like, yeah, there's got to be something more to it. Is that kind of your mindset? There's got to be something more to it than what I'm hearing.
Well, my mother plays a huge role here, because my mother was a rebel. We haven't talked much about her. She was a rebel. Part of the reason the divorce was what it was is that she rebelled against the system. She didn't want to live inside that box where the man commits adultery all the time and the woman doesn't. So she made her own rules up, and she had fun. She was quite a liver and a hedonist.
She was quite a liver.
And a hedonist, and many friends. She was loved by so many people, I can't tell you. And I think that's a great quality, to have opposites as parents.
Wow.
Not to say my father wasn't funny. He was also very funny, but it wasn't like she had a different spirit and rebelled all the time. She had lived through the Nazi occupation in Paris in World War II. So she was she really appreciated the freedom after a war, and a very loving person. So she's in my heart. She's always there. But I take from both of them. Both parents are very strong.
Later on, did you ever kind of think and say, you know, I used to not agree with my dad on these two things, you know, now that I'm 52 years old, this one part that I disagree with my dad, I agree with him. He was right here and he was right here, and he was wrong there and she was wrong there and she was right. Did that happen?
Sure. Oh yeah.
Was there anything specific?
Oh yeah. People. That's what life is. Like my mother, because of my father, became a Republican. She supported Reagan and all that, but she didn't really. It was all it's inside that she was a free spirit.
Got it.
And totally. And frankly, John Kennedy, my father was skeptical about him, preferred Nixon, and me too at that point. It took me a long. You have to learn for yourself. That's what the whole point of life is. It's your path to learn. If you don't change, if you're still the same person you were when you were young, well, you might like it, but it doesn't show that you have tried other states of being.
Pat, what's the one thing you always say about first you love your parents, then you begin to disagree with them, and then eventually you start to humanize them? What do you always say? It's called
idolize, demonize, humanize.
Yeah.
That's the three phases you go through parenting. Yeah,
that's pretty well said.
Idolize, demonize, humanize.
So if you enjoyed this little segment from the podcast, click over here to watch the entire podcast. And if you've not subscribed to the channel, please do so. Take care, everybody.